I remember when I was still about 8 years old, if I'm not mistaken. I remember it was a Good Friday celebration, and I went there with my direct elder brother, Pascal. He was about 2 years older than me, so he was about 10. And I don't know what was happening to him, but he was a bit angry that day with me for, I don't know for what reason. And I remember during Holy Communion, it was on Good Friday, normally there is always a liturgy of Holy Communion. It's not Mass celebrated on that day, it's just a service, and then we have liturgy of the Holy Communion, which is distributed to everybody. And there was a friend of mine I was sitting at the edge of the aisle, and there was a friend of mine who was passing by during that time of Holy Communion, and I stopped him and I started talking to him. It was something I wanted to ask him. And immediately my brother pulled me and said, "Tony, you have sinned. You are a very bad boy. You are talking to somebody who has just received Holy Communion." And then I tried to tell him, no, he has not received. He's just coming from outside. And he would not accept. So out of anger, I left the place. And I went to join the aisle for Holy Communion to go and receive, because I didn't want him to tell me something that would make me feel not to go for Holy Communion. And the moment I joined the line and I went for Holy Communion, I realized that friend of mine was right behind me, also going for Holy Communion. And I was just wondering, how can I prove to my brother that my friend had not received Holy Communion the first time, because it's right behind me. And as a kid, I went and I received Holy Communion, and very quickly I went to the pew, and then I was trying to explain to my brother that you should see that my friend is coming now. He's not received Holy Communion. Now he's received now. And the moment I started talking to him, he said the same words. "Tony, you are a sinner, you are bad, because you are speaking with Holy Communion in your mouth." So there was no way I could ever please him. The first time he said I was speaking to somebody who had just received Holy Communion. And the second time he said I was speaking with Holy Communion in my mouth. So there was nothing I could do to please him. And the same thing happened with Jesus, that despite everything that he is doing for the people, there is always a reason to put him down. The incident that happens in the gospel today is after he had cast out the devil out of a boy. And then the people said, "It is true, Beelzebul, that he cast out devils." And remember the mission of Jesus. The prophet Isaiah had said it, that the Spirit of the Lord has been given to me. He has sent me to bring good news to the poor, to set the prisoners free, to open the eyes of the blind. And this is what is associated with the Messiah. And Jesus is doing this thing, exactly this thing. And again, people do not find anything positive in that. Even though he's doing something good for the community, he's doing something good for people, people find everything wrong with that. And if others even say that they want a sign from him. But he has given them already a sign that is bringing healing to the blind. He's setting those who are captives free. He is even raising the dead. He is bringing a new era for the people. And yet, they still want a sign. In Luke's Gospel, in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 10, he says that there is no teacher, there is no disciple who is greater than his teacher, and there is no slave who is greater than a master. And if they have called me Beelzebul, what do you expect they will call you? If Jesus himself, who was all pure, who was all perfect, was called Beelzebul, what do you think they would call you? And that is why it's so important for us to look up, to always focus on Jesus in everything that we do. Because we have situations like this also where people can call us names and say things that we have no association with. Or we can hear our names being spoiled by our friends and all that. And we get so worried, we get so emotional, we get so traumatized and all that. And Jesus asked the same question. If they called me Beelzebul, your master and your teacher, what do you think they are going to call you? And that's why it's so important to keep our eyes focused, not in what people think about us, but what God thinks about us. Secondly, it may come to a situation where people want to remind us of our past. And truly, maybe we have had a very bad life in the past, or that we have gone through a lot of difficulties in the past, or have made some terrible mistakes and messes in our lives. And we know that at the moment we have a good relationship with Jesus. We've gone for confession maybe, or now at the moment we have a very good relationship with Jesus. But there are always people, and the devil is very good at that, to try to remind us of our past and make it seem like we would never get out of our past, even though Jesus wants us to get out of that. And the devil keeps pushing. I was watching 2 days ago the story of St. Paul of Tarsus. And of course we know who St. Paul was. But when he was in prison, in his lonely moments, in his down moments, that is when the devil was hitting him hard. And the devil reminding him of what he had done in the past, how he had persecuted the Christians, how he killed Stephen. And he was crying, how can God take away this thorn from my flesh? 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Lord, how can you take away this thorn from my flesh? Because he was constantly reminded of his past, of what he had done in the past, of how he had been a bad person, of all the mess. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, when he was crying out to God to take away this thorn, the voice came to him, my grace is sufficient for you. What does that mean? That it is true we have messes in our lives. A good friend of mine told me, you must see the mess, but focus on the grace. You see the mess of the life, but you must focus on the grace. If we focus on the grace, then if we focus on the mess, what would happen? We would begin to sink, like Peter. Remember when Peter was walking on water, when Jesus invited him to walk on water in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 14. And then he was focused and he was walking until he started to look left and right. In other words, trying to focus on what people are saying about you, trying to focus on the mess, trying to focus on what the chismes you have heard about you. At that moment, you will begin to sink because your eyes are off Jesus. And that is why it's so important that we must keep our eyes focused on him. We must see the mess, but we must not focus on the mess. We must focus on the grace that Jesus has given us. And the devil is very good at reminding us of our past, of the things that we have done wrong, of the mistakes that we have committed. Please let us see that, but let's not pay attention to that, because that only comes from the devil. Jesus will not want us to know about that. The prodigal father never wanted his son to be reminded of what he has done with his property. He said, my son was dead, and is now alive. He was lost, and is now found. That was what was important for the father. And so it's important that we accept the love of God, the mercy of God. At times, the most difficult person to forgive is actually ourselves, not the people around us. At times, it's much, much difficult to forgive ourselves of the things that we have done, more than even forgiving others. And so it's important that we must accept, and this was the prayer of St. Faustina, that we may be able to grow in love and to accept the love and mercy of God, which is beyond anything that we have ever done in the past. Let us not pay attention to what we hear about us, because that was done also to Jesus. Let us keep our eyes focused on Jesus, who is the perfecter of our faith. Let us see the mess, but let's focus on the grace.